The Pieces Lie Where They Fell by Evil Humor. Chapter 3. Page Turner. With a soft chirp, Page Turner found herself waking up just before sunrise, just as she liked to. Stretching out in her bed, she licked her lips and moved around in her small bedroom, moving over to her dresser that had her mirror reflecting the image of her bed coat and mane back at her. Sticking her tongue at herself, she fixed herself up in a flash of magic and saw she was perfect to go. After fixing her light green mane, as it was still a complete mess, and her magic didn't work on it for some reason. Rolling her eyes at that consistent little headache, she brushed her mane in place and took another look at herself to make sure she was ready to go. Smiling happily at her light yellow coat with her open book cutie mark on her flanks, she started to sing a happy tuneless song as she made her way out of her bedroom and started to prepare for her morning chores. The first was leaving the dormitories and preparing breakfast for everyone. She continued to sing as she entered the main kitchen, her magic pulling out all the food that her fellow librarians liked to eat in the morning, as well as retrieving an apple for herself. Taking a bite, Paige spat it out and grimaced as she saw that it was an Apple Clan apple. Those ponies had placed mass production over quality. Paige had spoken with the matron about switching to a better supplier, but Polished Apple was in charge of buying food, and as she was an apple, the Great Library got a discount on tasteless apples and other farm products. Thankfully, Paige had taken the time to start up a garden for the entire staff, with a bit of unofficial sponsoring of the Blade family, so that they would have options. Shaking back and forth as she worked with the cutting boards and stovetops, she almost fell into a song that had been in her family for ages, but paused as she heard chuckling behind her, causing her to meep in surprise. "Preparing breakfast for every pony again, Page Turner." Matron Hushtone clicked her beak in a soft, lecturing tone, leaning over to retrieve her cup of tea that Paige had already prepared for everyone. "Dear child, it is supposed to be everybody's responsibility to make their own meals, not for you to do it every morning." Blushing, Paige looked at her hooves before saying, "Is it so wrong that I like to be generous and kind?" Ruffling her mane, Matron Hushtone simply shook her head as she took her seat at the head of the long table, groaning ever so slightly. "No, my child, they are wonderful traits to have, but some will think you are employing the tactics of the lady in a place that belongs to the Magi of Stars." With a huff, Page Turner rolled her eyes as she finished making the morning meals and moving her to her place at the long table. "Those who stare too deep in the inner workings of my morning meals get porridge stuck up their noses." The griffin slapped an aged wing across her beak, doing her best not to cackle this early in the day and wake up the entire staff. With tears running down her face, the old griffin let out a weary sigh before she stared fondly at a smirking Page Turner, who was turning her porridge over with her spoon in her bowl. "Oh, my dear, that was a priceless gem," the matron said, as she tried to settle her laughter. "Go ahead and eat your breakfast and tend to your actual chores." "Yes, matron," Paige bobbed her head, spooning some food into her mouth, already going through the mental checklist she had prepared last night. With a swish of her tail as she made her way through the stacks and columns of books, scrolls, texts, and other manner of record-keeping, a soft whistle escaped her lips, putting all the misplaced titles into her cart, as well as put those she had with her away. It was soothing in a way, putting away things in their proper place, and knowing her place in the entire system. Not many foundlings stayed with their facility, as they went to answer the call of their cutie marks, or talent emblems, but Paige loved the simple life that the Great Library gave her. She had not expected much in her life, as it were, but things had a funny way of turning out. She would never have imagined that silly colt coming in and asking her where the guides to running away were would have such an impact on her life and fill her with love and wonder. She felt like letting out a squee, but there were senior librarians around her, and she was in a library. Still, she loved Nightblade, and she knew he loved her, and may all the virtues turn their backs on those who said otherwise. She wasn't after Nightblade due to his wealth, and she had nothing that Nightblade would want beyond herself. And even if Nightblade ever proposed to her, she was almost positive that Matron and the elders would give their blessings instead of demanding that she stay within the great library. The thought of her love actually proposing to her made Paige let out a squeak of joy, with her blushing as she got looks from her fellow librarians, with polished apple huffing at her. Letting out a snort at a filly who thought that just because she came from a wealthy family she was better than her, Paige had to stifle her laughter at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. Polish was sent to the great library for a reason, most likely to stop being a public embarrassment to her family, as opposed to the official reason of giving back to society. As if those ponies cared about anything but increasing their profit margins. Tilting her ears, she could hear the ivory doors open up, and the complaints of the students from the academy at the matron for taking so long to open the great library, which meant she had to get ready for her clients. None of the librarians had liked this when she first proposed it, but the matron had spoken of it in better light, as a minor noble family of almost no note, the Bell family, donated a sizable sum of funds after their child had joined Knight in her in their reading session. It then turned into her project and section at the great library, as more foals had been dropped off by their parents to outdo the Bells, but had turned into actual enjoyment and support for the great library that became a task the priests of the Lady endorsed. There would be no true acknowledgment for her, and what she had done to start all of this was quickly forgotten by most, but there were still foals that came to listen to her and read tales of the virtues and other fantastical stories, and that was enough for her. Passing the cart off to a lesser librarian, one who had taken the call of attending the great library only as a job instead of as their life, she picked up one of the scrolls of the Magi of Stars, and saw it was the one about the blue sorceress and her army of star creatures. Of course, it wasn't a true scroll of the Magi of Stars. Those had been lost for ages, and this was just a second hoof retelling of those days of wonder. But the foals loved it all the same. Turning around the corner, her smile grew, as there was already a herd of foals waiting for her, all beaming at her and saying, "Hello, Miss Paige Turner." Soaking in all of their love, she sat down in her chair and greeted them before informing them of what she would be telling them, what tale they would be hearing today. Hushing their cheers, Paige Turner cleared her throat and began to tell the story. To my dear liege and her Grand Majesty, Celestia of the Sun, my companions and I have another tale to tell you. It all began... Paige's eyes darted upwards as Knight padded into the room atop one of the shelves, which was against the rules and would annoy the cleaners to no end. Still, her smile grew as he patiently sat up there while she finished reading to the foals. And that, my dear foals, is how the Magi of Stars and the Virtues defeated the vile sorceress and her star creature army, Paige said, to the awe and wonder of the foals. Tomorrow I shall tell the tale of how the Virtues came to be, as to pay proper homage to the Honor Festival. Now, go to your parents, little ones. She dismissed them all with a tilt of her hoof, her smile growing as all thanked her as Miss Paige Turner. So sweet and adorable. Using her magic to put away the book, Her colt friend flew down and gave her a nuzzle across her face, before deciding he wished to be daring and place a kiss on her cheek. Giggling at how silly Nightblade was, she returned to the kiss with one of her own, before flashing him a love-filled smile. "Hello there, silly colt," she cooed at him, nuzzling against his non-sword side, and taking in a faint after-smell of mangoes. "What brings you here on this fine today?" "Well," Nightblade drawled out, as he placed his wing over her, making her heart go pitter-patter. He was leading her to the front doors of the library, daring to make an escape when he knew she had work to... "I was thinking to check out this lovely treasure called Page Turner for the day. Do you think I could manage this, or will others need to lean on this priceless piece of work?" She had to slam her hoof over her mouth to stop herself from laughing her head off, her face red with what Knight had just said. She swatted her tail at his side, doing her best not to break down in laughter. Straightening her neck and putting on her best serious face, she tapped her chin, going, "I will need to check with Matron Hushtone about this, dear sir," Paige said, as she turned her head to look at the matron, who was shaking her head at them as she tried to remain serious, but there was a smile on her face. "Excuse me, Matron Tone, but—" "Go, you two kids," the griffin cut her off, raising her wing at them, with her clicking her beak in laughter. "Enjoy yourselves today and tomorrow," she dismissed, before looking at Nightblade. "You will be coming by to pick her up for the festival, my lord?" "Of course," Nightblade said, nodding his head before facing Page Turner, his wing held out. "After you, my lady?" With a chuckle leaving her mouth, she leaned to give him another kiss. "Of course, my love." With a sigh of contentment as he led her down the same steps where she had been left as a foal. I don't know if you guys heard that over the engine, so I'm going to read it again. With a sigh of contentment as he led her down the same steps where she had been left as a foal, walking down the street with a content smile on her face. Breathing the crisp air, Paige started to scrunch her nose up as a rather powerful sneeze grew. Doing her best to hide her issue as they started walking up the west road, her eyes flicked to the changeling detector lights that were being installed across the road. They would undo any changeling magic with a magical flare as an alert. With how many ponies were around on a normal day, and how little changeling magic remained beyond shape-shifting, any action by a changeling would be noticed immediately, and no changeling would dare attract the attention of the ponies, especially not on Honor Day. As they approached the plaza with the stalls either built or crews working on finishing them, she could not hold it back any more. She stopped where she was, and, with Knight looking at her, she reared her head back and let out a squeak of a sneeze. Rubbing her snout, Paige saw that Knight was doing his best not to laugh, but failing horribly. Swatting him as her colt friend started to snicker at her, Paige's eyes darted around the plaza with statues of the virtues around a wide fountain before her nose started to smell something good. "For laughing at me," she said, in her best offended voice, tilting her nose up. "You must retrieve me some food, please." Rolling his eyes at her and darting in to sneak another kiss, Knight was really feeling affectionate today, before bowing slightly at her. "As you wish. Extra spicy of whatever I can find?" "Of course," Paige said, with a smile on her face and her tail swishing back and forth. After spending so much time with Knight over the years, she had grown to love spicy stuff and gained a very high tolerance. Ponies tended to freak out when she ate several jalapenos without so much as batting an eye. With a smile on his face, Knight bobbed his head and turned to get them food, and would probably begin his inspection of the Honor Festival once he got back. With a sigh escaping her lips as she watched her stallion walk away, her eyes lingering on his backside a bit longer than supposedly proper, she looked at the statues of the virtues of Equestria, the former heroes that had died with the goddess. She knew each of them and their stories due to working with the great library. Trotting around the fountain, she looked at each of them. The stallion of dedication, the lady, the wise oracle, the warrior, the stern warden, and the magi of stars. She wondered how they really were when they were alive. There were so few actual stories about them, and her sources... "Look out!" a voice shouted before a force crashed into her, knocking her to the side. Squeaking in surprise, Paige reached out for her magic when a loud crash startled her and stole her concentration away. Looking to the side, she could see the remains of crashed construction materials where she had been standing before, which could have killed her or severely injured her, to the point she had to go to the hospital. Looking up at her savior, Paige saw he was a young griffin with a sleet grey plumage and reddish gold coat, his eyes of two different colors, blue and gold. He looked over her quickly, no doubt making sure she was okay. "You good, miss?" he asked, with an odd twist to his words, offering a talon to her. She took it, and her nose wrinkled as she smelt alcohol on his breath. "Yeah," she said, her heart still racing as she was pulled upright. "Thank you." "No problem, miss." He bobbed his head a bit too forwards, his hot breath washing over her face. "It's a good thing I was watching what Diamond Back was doing, or not doing, or this could have gone a lot worse." He glared briefly at a griffin being chewed out by a unicorn flocked by other crew members, before smiling at her. "Really glad to see you're okay, miss," he said, slapping her shoulder lightly. "I'm fine," she stressed her words, forcing a smile on her face, and went into auto-polite mode. "Really, I'm all right, and thank you for saving me, Mr. Windbreaker," he said, telling her he was a hatchery griffin. His beak was clicking slightly as his tongue lapped the sides in quick darts, so he couldn't be drunk. Paige began to relax and smile for real. Holding out her hoof, she started to say, "I'm Paige Turner!" Knight shouted as he flew over, landing between her and Windbreaker. "What happened?" he growled at the griffin, leaning to pull out his sword. "I saved her, buddy," Windbreaker said in a stressed tone, puffing his chest out. "That idiot over there," he thumbed towards the other griffin, "wasn't watching what he was doing and almost dropped a full ton of stuff on her." "Is this true?" Knight looked at her, his face calming for a moment. She nodded her head in agreement, which caused Knight to relax for a second, before frowning. No doubt Knight smelled the alcohol on Windbreaker, and as the pony in charge of what happened in the festival, he was also responsible for all legal issues, including lawsuits. Which meant Paige knew exactly what Knight was about to do, out of kindness. "I thank you then, good sir, and both he and you are fired for negligence and improper conduct," Knight said, bowing his head to show his gratitude. "What?" Windbreaker shouted, eyes almost bulging out of his head. "I just saved her from being hurt, and I thank you for that," Nightblade hissed, clearly angered by how stupid this griffin was being. "And if you do not leave now, I will have security remove you from the premises." Windbreaker looked like he was about to say something, before throwing his arms in the air and storming away. Knight let out a sigh before looking at her. "Sorry about that, Paige. I'll have to go get you another extra spicy eggplant kebab in curry sauce." "It's okay," Paige nuzzled into his side. "Not that hungry anymore." "Heh, that would be a first," Knight said in a teasing tone. "Come, there is something I want to show you." With her arms darting back to the griffin that had saved her, Paige held back a sigh and followed her cult friend into the maze of stalls and vendors. Alright, for this chapter, my biggest question is what's going on with that griffin who smells like he's drunk but doesn't act like it. That seems to be the big question here. We learned that Paige Turner is an orphan. Let's see, what else did we learn? I know almost certainly this isn't going to be the fact, because there's no way they would be able to hide it this long, but some of the things from Paige Turner's point of view make it sound like she's a changeling. I don't think she is, but that's just my thoughts on the matter. Anyway, don't have much to report on this one. I'll see you again next chapter. Sorry this one took so long. Hopefully the next one won't take so long, but it might. Who knows? I don't do these things with a consistent schedule. I'll see you again whenever I get back. Thanks for sticking around.